Hey everyone, Jason here for day 3 of RPG Day 2019. And today's word is engage. And I thought about this a little bit. I didn't want to think about it too much because I wanted it to be a little bit spontaneous, but I wanted to kind of have an idea because I tend to ramble in my videos. But engage. So the first thing I thought of actually was Star Trek, Captain Picard. But I have never played a Star Trek role-playing game, and I love the shows. I mean, the original and the Next Generation. I did watch some Deep Space Nine. I like that, but the original and Next Generation, I mean, it was a classic. I've seen a little bit of Discovery. What little of it I've seen, I've liked. I'm interested to see what they do with Picard. But anyway, this is not going to be about Star Trek. This is going to be about a more important engage, and that would be engaging your players. Because that is a problem that seems to be, well, I'm sure everybody has that problem at some point, engaging players at the table, but it's a problem that we have at our table. Although, not so much now as it was before, and I think there might be a few reasons why that is. Back when I took a hiatus from role-playing games for a long time, it was a long time that I took a break. I'm trying to think about how long it was, 10 years maybe, that I didn't play. Let's see, I went from 2nd into 3rd. I never played 3rd edition D&D. I fooled around with a couple of games while 3rd edition was in print. I should say 3.5. I got the original 3rd edition Player's Handbook, DM's Guide, all that stuff. I never played it. I wasn't super interested in it. It was a little too complex. Not complex, it's too crunchy. Not that I couldn't understand it, I just didn't want to play it. But I got seriously back into stuff around Pathfinder and 5e. And so the game that I got back into, originally was Pathfinder and Mathfinder, and we had our GM was not super experienced, but very excited to get the game going and host it and be part of it and that stuff. And unfortunately, he took on a lot of responsibility that I think that maybe he shouldn't have, and that was having 8 players, 9 players at the table, some of them minors, like kids, preteen and teenage kids mixed in with us 40-year-old adults. And not that we did anything that was offensive or anything like that. I mean, we told offensive jokes and stuff, but these kids are not dumb. They're smart kids, and they understand that things are just jokes. And they weren't, put it this way, they weren't offended by vulgar language and us being silly and goofy. Nothing you wouldn't see at a comedy movie or something, but nothing inappropriate, put it that way. So he took on 8 or 9 people on his group, and it was very hard. One, being an inexperienced GM, and 2, having 8 or 9 people at the table, very few of them, less than half of them, experienced role players. I want to say me and my best friend Jeremy were the most experienced people at the table, including the GM. It was us two were the most experienced people, probably. I think there were a couple other people that had some experience with Vampire and things like that back in the day. But the number of people that he had at the table kept it very hard to have everybody's attention at one time on what we were doing. So it was hard to keep them engaged. And that wasn't his fault. It was just we had too many people at the table. And some of them were kids. They were not, they weren't there. Not just the kids. There were some people at the table that weren't there because we were playing Pathfinder. They were there because they were hanging out. We were hanging out with each other. They were hanging out with friends. And there were some of us at the table because we wanted to play role-playing games. And so you've got a bunch of diverse people, age groups, personalities, and more importantly, diverse reasons for being at that table. So it was a mishmash of people didn't want to do different things, different reasons why they were there. Although I will say, to their credit, nearly everybody showed up every month. It was just a once a month game group. But everybody showed up and was willing to play. But staying engaged was hard, even for me sometimes, because I had terrible luck with my dice. Having 9 people at the table was hard to stay focused on the story. I didn't really hardly ever knew what was going on, because there were 9 characters trying to do things and interject into the story and things like that. So being engaged was hard. Once I personally dropped out of that group after a couple of years, I took a little bit of time off from gaming again, probably about a year or so. Maybe not quite a year, a little less than a year, maybe half a year or so. Because I wasn't having fun in that group. That was not, I was having a lot of really bad luck with the dice. It was hard to stay focused and interested in a 9-player game. And I wasn't really fond of the system. I'm not a huge Pathfinder fan. If it was, the only thing available, I would play it again, kind of like how it was back then. But I wasn't engaged, so I wasn't part of it. And then eventually that big 9-person group split apart, and after a while, that GM got the starter box for 5th edition D&D, and I had already had the main books for it. And so I kept in contact with everybody, because we were all friends, but we didn't actually play in a group. So he got the 5th edition starter box. He said, "Hey man, I'm putting a group back together. I want to know if you are interested." I said, "Yeah, of course I'm interested." He said, "It's just going to be me GMing and 4 other players, 4 adults, me, my best friend, and 2 other really good friends of mine. Those other 2 guys are not role players though. They played in the Pathfinder group, but they're not truly gamers. They're the kind of people who are at the table because we're hanging out with friends, having a good time. One guy eventually got the player's handbook and was able to create his own character. One guy to this day still doesn't have his own copy of the player's handbook, which is fine, not a big deal, but he probably wasn't very engaged because he didn't have a book and he didn't know much about the rules, even though we had been playing for a couple of years now. He just wasn't engaged. That's not why he was there, you know what I mean? Which, hey, that's fine. At least you're there with your friends and having fun. It got to the point to where with 2 of the guys there, the ones that were not engaged, the non-gamers, it got to the point where sometimes it was a little frustrating because they were not engaged and they didn't pay attention. They didn't know what dice to roll. Even after playing for a couple years, didn't know what dice to roll, didn't know their character's abilities. They didn't truly role play a character. They just rolled the dice and things like that. So it got to the point off and on where I wasn't having much fun, and I also, because I was losing fun in the game, disengaged a little bit. And I would show up and I enjoyed playing, but I wasn't really invested in the game. So fast forward a few months, about a year. We're like a year through this campaign, and we have, except for one guy, 3 of us party wiped. I got and charmed by a vampire, and proceeded to eliminate basically the rest of the team. I killed everybody on the team quite easily. But so after that, let me back up a little bit. One of the guys, the guy who's least engaged in the game, had never created his own character ever. He had a little bit of input, but never really created a character. The other guy had created his own characters, but didn't really he played the same character in class over and over and over, which, whatever. Fast forward to this point where we get a wipe from the vampires and we have to create new characters. One guy decided to create something new. He decided to create a necromancer and thought up of an actual backstory for it and a personality and all this stuff. And then the other guy, while he didn't create the character by himself, he got with the GM, and instead of just the GM creating 4 or 5 characters and him picking one out that he wanted to play, he cooperated and co-created the character with him, so he had more of an investment in it. And ever since then, both players have been way more engaged. When they took the time to be part of the creation of their character and the character's background and the history and character quirks and personality traits and things like that, it made a huge difference. And I think maybe before they didn't put that kind of effort or time or thought into it, not realizing that it would help as much as it did. But once they did, man, it clicked, and those guys are fun to play with now. They don't do a lot of role playing, but we're all some of us are kind of shy, and I'm a little shy. I don't role play a lot, but I do a little bit. But the dynamic of the group shifted once they became more engaged, and I think getting your players to be engaged in what you're doing, regardless of whether it's the character or the story or the system or whatever the case may be, getting them engaged can change the dynamic of play, which you would think would be a common thing. Yeah, of course it would. But if you don't have a great dynamic, you don't realize how much being engaged does help. And after those two guys really got engaged with their characters and they contributed to the story more, they didn't have their cell phones out and play on Facebook anywhere near as much anymore. They paid attention mostly to their dice rolls. They started using character abilities. They enjoyed the options they had with their characters, and it's so much more fun when the players are engaged. And that's always that's their decision. You can't force somebody to be engaged and participate more. But I tell you what, after those guys got those two characters created with their own personalities and backgrounds, the style of play changed. Our happiness and fun factor changed. We just started having so much more fun, and the game has shifted, and it's so much more fun now. And I think doing things to find out what engage your players can only benefit your group. If you have a weird dynamic, if players aren't really interested, if they are role playing, but they're role playing the types of characters that don't mesh well with the rest of the group, or they're creating conflict within the party, whether it be in character or out of character conflict, but they seem engaged. Maybe they're just engaged in an unhealthy or unproductive way, and shifting the focus of their engagement to something more beneficial to the group and to them might be worth looking into. You might say to yourself, well, the character's engaged, or the player's engaged, he loves role playing, he always role plays his character out, he always has something to add to the scene or the group or whatever. But it's just either you would think that it wouldn't be boring, but it could be boring, or it could be a negative attribute that pops up during gameplay or whatever. But shifting the focus, even if they are engaged, shifting the focus of that engagement, or how they view how engaged they are, or what they're engaged with, as far as a character or a story or a background or a history or the game world itself. Those can all make huge differences in things. Sorry, I'm getting gas. And can make big differences and change the way your game functions. I'm going to pause this for a second because I'm going to get gas. Thanks. Okay, thanks for being patient. I had to pause this to get some gas. So, anyway, like I was saying, finding a way to shift a player's engagement if they are engaged, or finding a way to engage them if they're not engaged, can be a huge benefit to your group and to your players and to your story. And it might progress things into other games that you didn't know you wanted to play, or scenarios you didn't know that you wanted to be in, with characters and stories. And I think finding the right type of engagement is both hard to do, but very rewarding. And sometimes it's not something that maybe you can like just head on talk about because you don't want to make people uncomfortable. Like, you know, you're not role playing, you're not contributing, or you might even be detracting from the group because you're not engaged. And you know, when you're hanging out with your best friends, that's not something you really want to bring up. You don't want there to be any hard feelings, like, you know, so and so is like doesn't want me at the table. But even if that's not the case, you know, it's always hard to bring something like that up when you're with your best friends and things like that. So, you know, it's a fine line you got to walk. You got to be careful, and finding that engagement, the right level of engagement, is great. And there could be the flip side to where somebody's too engaged and they become the alpha player, and they're the ones who always want to have the spotlight and not let any other players have any of the spotlight to role play or talk or make decisions or anything like that. So sometimes people are too engaged. So you have to find a fine balance. It's a weird spot. It's a weird thing to I guess dissect and you know, zoom in on and focus on and figure out how it's working with your group dynamic and the culture of play that you have. You know what I mean? So anyway, I did ramble a little bit in that one, and I apologize. That was a tough subject for me, a tough word to think about. So hope you guys are enjoying RPG A Day in 2019, and we'll see you later.